Okay, confession time. I really love Caravaggio. Ms. Jacobs used to describe this as Mrs. McConnell's man crush, and she was pretty much right. I'd also like to pause in our breakneck dash through art history, take a breath, and look at one painter in somewhat more depth. My man crush aside, Caravaggio seems like a good choice. He was not only an extraordinary painter, he was an extraordinarily influential painter. Past AP exams included a number of questions along the lines of, this painter was influenced by blank, and often the fill-in-the-blank name was Caravaggio. So, I'm going to spend more time on Caravaggio than our rushed pace really allows. I'll start with a teaser. This painting by Caravaggio is actually a self-portrait. You should recognize the subject. This is still another David. But which figure is Caravaggio? Let's watch this first video clip and see. So here's a painting that my husband and I saw several years ago in Naples. It is entitled The Seven Works of Mercy. Unlike your required Caravaggio painting, The Calling of Matthew, this one doesn't grab the viewer right away. It's awfully busy, and that Virgin Mary, baby Jesus, and angels swooping in from above maybe seem a little over the top. But if you study the crowded canvas, you can see all of the church's declared seven works of mercy being performed, and by a rather unlikely cast of characters. So, for example, in the background we see a man burying the dead, although all we really see are the corpse's feet. On the right, a woman visits an imprisoned man and gives him milk from her breast. A pilgrim, third from the left, and identified by the shell in his hat, asks an innkeeper for shelter. St. Martin of Tours, fourth from the left, has torn his robe in half and given it to the naked, crippled beggar in the foreground. Behind them, a figure that's been identified as Samson is relieving his thirst. So, why is this a quintessentially Catholic counter-Reformation work? Here's a hint. What is this work and what is its message? This is Cranach's Allegory of Law and Grace. One of the big disputes between Catholics and Protestants, you should remember, erupted over Luther's claim that salvation comes from faith alone and not from works. The Catholic Church defended the central role played by good works as well as faith in salvation. So in this work, Caravaggio is lending his support to Catholic doctrine. Yet even as he defends Catholic theology, Caravaggio is breaking with some of the traditions of Catholic painting. How? Well, Caravaggio's saints and Good Samaritans don't look all that saintly, do they? These mercy givers are part of an urban mob crowded into a squalid city street. This was Caravaggio's Rome, a Rome of pickpockets, prostitutes, gamblers, and thieves. As your homework noted, we know a fair amount about Caravaggio, and mostly because he showed off so often in police records. There's another important way in which Caravaggio breaks from tradition. Where are we, the viewers, in relationship to the painting? Seems to me we're in serious danger of being kicked or sat on by the man in the foreground. The painting just bursts out of its frame. The head and torso of the dead man, for example, are cut off by the painting's cropping. The body of the prisoner drinking from his daughter's breast is likewise off stage, in theatrical terms, always appropriate to Baroque art. Notice how this movie still reveals the director's framing or cropping of the scene. You probably don't even notice this kind of visual trick. You're used to it. But when Caravaggio first broke out of the picture frame and let the figures he was painting spill into the church aisles or the laps of his faithful, he was mostly breaking new ground. Although, indeed, we saw some of this in Lippi's Madonna and Child with Two Angels. This technique is what art analysts call an open composition, as opposed to a closed composition, where all the action is carefully enclosed within the frame of the painting. So what does this open composition accomplish in artistic and narrative terms? Well, we're drawn into the picture and personally involved in the scene. Caravaggio's paintings invite participation, not just viewing. In this famous painting, Paul is falling toward us, the future recipients of his epistles. If the soldier wearing armor and seizing Christ steps back a few inches, we're going to get squashed. We can almost smell St. Peter's feet. And where is the rest of Holofernes? Did you remember from our first week that the model for the maidservant was a woman who ran one of Rome's most notorious houses of prostitution, and that the model for Judith was one of her top working girls? That, as I've already mentioned, was another big break with tradition. Okay, we finally get to our required work. This is one of the most famous paintings in art history, and it used to show up in some form or another on almost every AP test. Now it's one of our required works, and for once I'm going to make no complaints about the College Board's choice. Before we hear about the work in the video and analyze it in a few slides, I want to pause for a minute and encourage you to talk about why this painting makes such a strong impact, why it was so shocking, and why it made Caravaggio's reputation as a painter. Or, if this is what you think, tell us why you don't see what all the fuss is about. What do you think? What's the big deal? In the video clip you're about to see, Harvard art historian Simon Schama begins by talking about an earlier painting that Caravaggio did for one of his church patrons. Like many Caravaggio works, this painting features boys, often in rather sensuous poses, and yes, Caravaggio's taste did run mostly in that direction. But this early painting also displays some of the techniques that would come to fruition in the Calling of Matthew. And that's why I'm starting the video clip at the end of Professor Schama's discussion of this work. Before we get back to the Calling of Matthew, I want you to take a look at the second of the Matthew paintings, which you also saw in the video. What do you notice about the composition? Once again, we see figures in the foreground spilling off the canvas and into the viewer's space. We've talked about the artistic impact of this open composition. What theological or religious point does this open composition make? The church wanted drama and spiritual power and an immediate impact on the senses. Caravaggio wanted all of that too. But he also wanted to impress on his viewers that Christianity isn't about something that happened long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. The men and women who followed Jesus, the men and women who condemned and crucified Jesus, we are they. In a way, Caravaggio is channeling Luther even as he remains totally committed to Catholic doctrine. He invites the viewers into a personal relationship with the scriptures. But the scripture narratives come to life for us not only by encouraging us to meditate on the printed word, but even more by helping us enter into the experience personally. The Christian narrative is, again, experienced far more through emotional rather than intellectual response. And again, this was part of the strategy of the Catholic Reformation, Counter-Reformation, as I've talked about in earlier lectures. Your homework reading and videos continue to use the term dramatic to describe Baroque art. So here's a question. How is light used in a stage production? And how is darkness used as well? We talked about this the first week of class. If you think about it, in a theater production, the darkness is almost as important as the light. When we sit in the audience in darkness, the immediate distractions around us fade and we're drawn toward the action on stage. Spotlights tell us where to focus our attention, but we also know that the shadows may be hiding action to come. You should know the term chiaroscuro by now. Tenebrism, from the Italian word for murky, refers to the use of darkness as a dramatic and artistic device. It's basically a subcategory of chiaroscuro and one of the innovations that later artists borrowed from Caravaggio. Notice it showed up in a lot of the AP classroom questions. So here's a detail from the Calling of Matthew and a comparison. Where have we seen that hand at the top before? Well, I hope you all recognize Adam reaching toward God in Michelangelo's creation of man on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So again, what theological point is Caravaggio making here? We see Christ, the new Adam, undoing the failures of the old Adam. The similarity of the hand gesture, in other words, is not an accident. So let's recap. In what ways was Caravaggio very much a Baroque painter, along the lines of what we already learned about the Italian Baroque? Like Bernini, he took lessons in lighting and staging from the theater. Indeed, Bernini was heavily influenced by Caravaggio, whose work was already turning heads when Bernini began his career in Rome. Caravaggio strove to make the spiritual immediate, powerful, emotional, a gospel that could reach those who couldn't read. His paintings capture movement with twisting figures and diagonal line. And how did Caravaggio take Baroque drama in an entirely new direction? Before you answer this question, consider another question first. Why did the nuns who commissioned the painting on the right send it back without paying for it? This is not Filippo Lippi's Virgin Mary or Raphael's. This Mary looks old, tired, and genuinely dead. Her skin has a greenish tinge, her body is bloated, and what's with that screaming red dress? Then the word got out that Caravaggio's model for the dead Mary was a drowned prostitute. The nuns were appalled. This was a little too much real life, a painting not about eternal life, but about the tragedy of death. You saw this painting in the video. It's easy to see the chiaroscuro and the tenebrism in this work. The circles are probably unnecessary. But what other characteristic Caravaggios do you notice? Because he's ripe for an attribution question. So again, we see open composition. Paul threatens to land in our laps. The groom, likewise, is an ordinary fellow occupied with his job and seeming to be totally oblivious to a history-changing event that's happening right below him. Biblical events, in other words, were real events that erupted into the lives of real people like us. Caravaggio's last years were grim. He murdered a man, maybe over a tennis match, maybe over a prostitute, the same prostitute, by the way, who was Caravaggio's model for Judith. Apparently, they both fancied her. At any rate, our anti-hero fled first to Italy and then to Malta and then back to Sicily, where he died attempting to return to Rome. The beheading of John the Baptist was painted for the Knights of Malta. It's the only painting he ever signed, as if in blood, as you can see from the detail on the bottom left. Violence permeates Caravaggio's painting as it permeated his life. But Caravaggio's graphic depictions of violence also made an artistic and a religious point. So, here comes our final video clip, just to catch you up on Caravaggio's life. After Caravaggio committed murder, he fled to Malta and was accepted into the Order of the Knights of Malta, who took him in apparently because they wanted some Caravaggio paintings for their own church. The beheading of John the Baptist still hangs in that church in Malta. I visited a few years ago. But as we'll see, this new stab at redemption didn't end well either. Caravaggio, by the way, never did reach Rome with his painting, a gift meant to honor the church for once again pardoning him. He was tossed off the ship he boarded, and died before he could get to Rome. The painting did, however, manage to arrive, and in a way, it served as Caravaggio's final confession. In my next lectures, I will travel north and west to Baroque art in Flanders, France, Spain, and finally the Netherlands.